Happy Thursday, everyone. We have a sunny day here in Chicago, and we are so excited to be spending the morning with Mr. Charlie Adkins over at Round Lake for another Teacher Thursday in our Spring Spotlight series. So, Charlie, thank you so much for being with us. We'd love to have you just introduce yourself to get us started.
Okay, I'm Charlie Adkins. I've been a teacher at Round Lake High School for 15 years. I started with the business and math departments, moved over to science for a long time. About 4 years ago, Round Lake decided we were going to embark on implementing Project Lead the Way. And that was a large undertaking, and we've been very well supported. We are currently a kindergarten through 12th grade Project Lead the Way district.
Wow.
Proud to say that. And we're in our fourth year of the program. So this year was the first year doing the capstone course. And last summer, I heard about the ISTI program from one of my administrators, and we really realized that it was an excellent fit for what we were trying to accomplish with our students and broadening their horizons and the objectives of our curriculum and our course. So they asked me to get involved in this, and it's been really rewarding experience. Complicated, obviously, this spring, but it's been a very rewarding experience. My background for that, I'm an Army veteran. I worked in business for a long time. I'm an actual engineer. So I really enjoy teaching and watching students exceed their own expectations, which is, I think, what we're all trying to do at the end of the day.
I like that a lot. You've touched on a little bit, but I heard you say that Project Lead the Way was a big undertaking, and especially at Round Lake when it's fairly new. Can you elaborate on that process and maybe how you've used experiences as an engineer or as in business to really integrate Project Lead the Way with an authentic feel to Round Lake?
That's an excellent question. We started off as part of a $29 million referendum. So we were supported by our community members, which is really rewarding. So we put $29 million into our high school. And as part of that, not all of it obviously went to Project Lead the Way, but we created a Project Lead the Way space from an existing space. And at the time, our CTE programs were struggling. So we really revamped not just the engineering side of the house, but also our digital graphics side of the house and our business side of the house. And what we did was we brought in a lot of educators that were kind of already in-house, but in different departments. And part of that, too, is we have to support the program, and we had to have a clear vision of what we're trying to accomplish. But I got to stress that it's having the right people on the team. I'm blessed to having two great educators I work with, Mr. Simonik and Mrs. Clausen, and also having administration that understands that you get those weird requests sometimes. One of my teams this year, who's not working on the ISTI project, but I need to buy a lawnmower. So convince accounting. It's like, hey, I'm buying a lawnmower. But we get that support. And that's kind of having a long-term vision of what you're trying to do and having a long-term vision that you don't achieve greatness. You don't achieve some massive success in your first attempt at doing something. That is an engineering 101. Your prototype rarely works perfectly. So we're still in a prototyping phase of the course, but we're getting better at it. I think that's the key thing is we continue to improve. I'll be back at school today, actually, this afternoon, taking care of a couple ends because one of our teachers is still going to training this summer. We're pulling out some 3D printers and things like that for her to bring with her and utilize. So, but it is a tremendous, changing a curriculum and implementing a curriculum this large is a huge financial undertaking, and it involves commitment at all levels of our program. And I'm really blessed to work in a district where we have strong district administration that supports us. We also have building administrators. My building administration team is really helpful in understanding. It's like the busing and the strange requests and we're running over to Baxter. Oh, how many kids do you bring? 180. It's like, how are you? And I can't stress enough about how we have a relationship with Baxter as well, how beneficial that relationship is, and how much of a difference people like Mrs. Jaron make for us. So, and our Baxter mentors through this program as well.
Excellent. So I heard you say kind of in there as well, not only do you have administrative support, but you have a lot of community support. So for those who may not know the Round Lake community, can you tell us about, maybe what makes this community unique or what's been the benefit of working so tightly with a community support?
One of the things I think that makes Round Lake really special is we're a community for the most part of first generation college students in our school. We're over 80% economically disadvantaged. And one of the things I always believe, and I see it over and over again, is, our parents, the parents in our community have come to Round Lake to give their kids an opportunity. And they value that opportunity. They value effective and purposeful instruction. And I just have to believe that, the parents are excited. I've been so honored and blessed. So many times I've met parents who come into our space, or we have the opportunity to bring our students to the school board and acknowledge something that they've accomplished. These are people who work really hard, and they're working hard to make a difference. And I just kind of fall back on that trope that, we have great parents. We have people who want to see their students succeed. And it is reassuring. I mean, of course, we're a high school. We are high school in 2020. We have our usual problems of every high school in 2020 I'm a parent of a soon-to-be 18-year-old and a 21-year-old, so I sympathize with anyone who says, well, I can't really make my teenager do what I want them to do. It's like, I understand that.
I feel that,
as a
right.
parent and as an educator. But I do believe that it's a special community. And I came to Round Lake 15 years ago, and Round Lake at the time we struggled, and we had significant issues. And it's only in these last couple of years that I see the bedrock of all the changes that make us successful now was laid 10, 15 years ago. I went out to a school in Brockton, Massachusetts once for a very eye-opening visit. And one of the things that impressed me so much about the Brockton transformation in Massachusetts was that they started with a cadre of educators in the building who said, we're going to change it ourselves. We're going to do it here. Mm-hmm. And we still have our struggles. I was on a seminar, a group chat with many of my peers last night that I respect immensely. And we were discussing the things that we're still not good enough at. There are still challenges ahead of our building, ahead of our community, but we are in a better place than we were. I mean, some of the challenges we're starting to take on now, we wouldn't even have attempted 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. But we have grown, and I'm really, you've been in our classroom. I've got a beautiful space. My students have iPads. I think one of the biggest realizations I had a few weeks ago before the pandemic started, but it was right around the end of the school year before the pandemic shut us down. A couple of my students, not my students, but they're all my students in the program, but they're technically in another teacher's class. And they were trying to bend some metal, and they're working with it to solve an engineering problem. Finally, one of them just gets fed up. He's like, forget this. He's like, we're just going to model it in CAD and have Mrs. Clausen 3D print the part. And it's equivalent to a student saying, okay, I'm going to go over there and get a pair of scissors. Or I'm going to go over and I'm going to get a screwdriver. The fact that the technology that we like as adults, as outsiders, as people I'm a Gen X, these are new things for us. To my students, these are commonplace tools. Mm-hmm. Of course, you have access to desktop computers with incredibly powerful i7 chips in them and everything. Of course, you have access to 3D printers that can rapidly prototype something. Of course, we do this in second period principles of engineering class. I mean, doesn't everyone? And what I like to get to that is the implementation of technology and such. It has to become transparent to the learning. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things I'm so proud of it in Round Lake in general, but in our school, and especially in our program, is students don't say, well, I'm doing this on an iPad using Inklings. No, it's just I'm studying physics, or we're debating history, or we're debating the role of manifest destiny in the growth of America. And you see those conversations happening. Again, there's always, one of the things I love about education is there's always something else to do. Mm-hmm. And I think if I ever get to the point as an educator where I say, well, I've mastered and conquered all the challenges in front of me, then I definitely would need to retire.
Yeah.
We keep a private running document, just the small group of us, and I keep my own, about all the things we need to do better next year.
And I think this year you took on the challenge of adding the Baxter STEM Challenge. So in addition to not only really leading the way for Project Lead the Way and kind of that aspect within the Round Lake community, you also added. So you did that this year where you're kind of learning and taking on challenges. So we'd love to.
New course.
Yes, within that course, we'd love to hear too about working with Baxter on the STEM Challenge, but not only that, the intersection between the STEM Challenge and the Project Lead the Way capstone, because that was unique to your school as well and to your students. So kind of looking at where those two intersected and how they played to strengthen one another.
There's actually a very good integration between this concept of the ISTI Challenge. And one of the things I liked with the ISTI Challenge was, first off, I do believe that working in a remote digital world, while increased pace as a result of a current pandemic situation, this is not new. One of the things I liked about was the Mentoring Matters engine, MME. I just MME.
Mentor matching engine. You got it. Yeah.
Yeah. My update to the students would be, have you done your MME update for Thursday? So I rarely use the whole phrase. All it says on my tabs is MME. But this is becoming more and more commonplace. My wife is director of clinical operations for a pharmaceutical trial company, and she has been working remotely for a decade and change. And yes, she travels and she meets face to face, but there's that transition to a 21st century worldview where you're not always going to be geographically tightly linked to the people that you are working with, where there's, we're trying to, in the workplace, we are separating this idea of geographical and time criteria to getting professional work done. And in that sense, I really like the fact that we were working remotely with the Baxter mentors from it through ISTI, that my students, at one point in the process, they uploaded a picture they made, a sketch on the iPad, of course, but they'd done something on the iPad, and here's what we're thinking. And our mentor wrote a bunch of excellent responses back, but the responses were very well written, but directed to driving my students to clearly explain what they had drawn in a mentor MME style post.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that happens is things that you can explain face to face, things that you can explain when you're sitting next to someone, it doesn't always come across when you move to a different platform.
Right.
When you move to an MME platform, or you move to a wiki, or you move to some other form of information transfer. And that was actually pretty eye-opening for my students, because at one point, one of the questions, they were like, well, they totally misunderstood that the yellow part didn't mean to do that. And I'm like, well, where did it say the yellow part didn't mean to do that?
Sure.
Like, I'm devil's advocate here, but I'm like, I look at it, and I'm like, I can see, yeah, that makes sense to me. The yellow part of you. But this is becoming more and more the way that we communicate in the world. Face-to-face is obviously best. In person, I believe we're social creatures. Isolation has not been great, I think, for anyone, especially those of us who like to work in a classroom with 2,300 teenagers, as I like to say. I like the chaos of our building. It is refreshing every day. Not that there are always some days that you come in and you're like, oh, this again, right? But it is a dynamic environment. But moving forward, this working with the ISTI program and the mentors through first that modality of communication was great for them. But then we look at how this intersected with the program. What we have at now Project Lead the Way and through their curriculum, which we've implemented, is we get to this idea of my students spend years in the program learning skills. Mm-hmm. So by the time they get to the capstone course, they have a series of skills. They've gone through a science curriculum and a math curriculum at our building, but also they've gone through this engineering curriculum. And for 3 years, for the most part, we've been teaching them how to solve problems, the engineering process. There's many ways to describe it. There's many variants of it. But I think the engineering process does boil down to identify what you're trying to do, come up with solutions, implement them, and then take a step back and say, did that work? Mm-hmm. It's, if it worked, if everything worked perfectly, we'd still be on iPhone about 2s. So, but what I loved about this program was at this point, for the capstone level, as I told the students the first couple of days, I'm not teaching you another system. I've taught you how to use Arduino processors. I've taught you how to use 3D printers. I've taught you how to build robots, how to code in 2 different languages, which are both C++ overlays. Now, it's time for you to take those skills and synthesize them and attempt to solve an actual problem as an actual engineer does. And I think one of the great things about engineering, a 4-year engineering curriculum that ends with you getting a bachelor's of science in something engineering is, you're not, at that point, you're not actually qualified to do anything in my opinion.
Right.
You are qualified to know what questions to ask if you've come out of a good program. You're qualified to look at something and say, well, it's not actually just as simple as bolting something onto that. So it takes a long time to get to the point where you really feel comfortable with what you're doing as an engineer. But the first time that you attack a problem like that, where you're like, wow, I'm responsible for this from beginning to end, it is a gut checking moment. And I love the fact that these opportunities like this ISTI program and what we do in our program, it allows our students to get that much sooner. I do recall it was not, my students right now get opportunities I did not get until I was in my 3rd year in an engineering school. Mm-hmm. They get to break things. And I tell students all the time, things break. My rule is we don't break the same thing the same way twice. That's my only rule.
I think that's fair.
Break it in a new creative way. Do something different. Watch this fall apart in a new, unique fashion. But keep working on it. And that's okay, is that we don't have a scripted problem. Mm-hmm. I remember when I first read the Baxter Challenge on clean water, I was kind of like, wow, that's I have taught high school chemistry, but I'm no chemist. It's actually my wife's degree. She reminds me once in a while. And I'm like, wow, there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah.
And that was a really rewarding experience, because the idea, and the students also, I think, need to understand once in a while that educators, we don't know everything. We don't have all the answers. I think that's an eye-opening experience for me in my junior high school. It's a sudden realization that my Algebra 2 trig teacher had already worked the problems ahead of time. It was like a lightning bolt. I'm like, wow, he's not super genius. He did this yesterday. But we try to encourage an encouraging space in our program, in our rooms, where students have a safe spot to ask questions and experiment with something. Try to see if something works. Try to see if something doesn't work,
Yeah.
and that's okay. And then, even then, the opportunities we had to meet with the Baxter mentors, my students were very nervous. They're like, oh. And the people we had to work with were so nice and so professional and put my students at ease and really made them understand that we're all people and we're all working through problems. And they were able to form relationships there and get feedback there in a supportive environment. And I do believe it's always wonderful to bring our students out of the building. I encourage students to leave the building. We try to get them out as much as possible. But also, if someone leave Round Lake, I encourage everyone. I'm like, hey, Northern Illinois is great. I've now lived here, but by all means, Mr. Adkins, I think I want to go to Europe. Like, you should. I think I want to go to, my keychain is from a student, from my car is from a former student of mine that did a summer in Turkey before things got strange in Turkey. And it was just a really life-changing experience for her. It's changed her career path. So I do believe these are, anytime you get students down to like the Baxter headquarters and that afternoon that we spent down there, that is a really impressive thing because they see that the world's bigger than they are. They see that these are challenges ahead of them. One of the speakers there talked about the fact that they never expected to be working for Baxter in that role. That made a real impression on my students. It's like, wow, so she got a college degree in something and then decided that she didn't like it.
And did something else, right?
I'm like, and they're like, can you imagine that? I'm like, yes. Like, I've told you before, I have a degree in engineering and a master's in business, and now for a long time I was teaching math. It's like, I'm like, I can understand that, but one of the things that we always look at this age group, from the high school age through into your 20s, is I try to stress to my students to increase their capacity for understanding as much as possible, to get as many experiences as they can, because at a certain point, becoming an adult is recognizing there's 168 hours in a week. And the question for most of my students, almost all of my students, is it's not going to be a question of what can you excel at. Because I just heard again from one of them last night, my students are capable of excelling in so many different ways. At some point, becoming an adult is saying, well, I have the capacity to excel in this arena, but I'm not going to be pursuing it because I'm choosing to excel in this other arena that brings me more passion, that brings me more purpose, that brings me more fulfillment. Just because you have so many potential abilities doesn't mean you're going to have time to pursue them all. At the end of the day, it's 160 hours in a week, and that starts becoming the limiting factor. As I keep reminding my students, not right now. Now is the time. Go off and you want to think you want to be a nurse? Well, definitely we have a wonderful medical Panthers club, and they do great things. We have an anatomy and physiology course that does great things. We have a business course that does good as its course is. We have a teacher and program that has the students designing apps. So like teachers come up with problems they want to address, and he had the students designing apps to solve those problems. I mean, that's what I talk about. It's not just, Round Lake isn't actually focusing on just one little bubble I'm part of a much larger team. We're addressing these things across the board.
Yeah.
All sorts of opportunities going on, and we encourage our students to take all of them. I've had lots of students that have left my program to go do something else, and now I'm getting them back. I just noticed this year. It's like, oh, you're coming back to me.
Yeah. Well, that breadth of experience, I think, is such a critical part of the high school experience, and being, like you said, being able to tackle an industry problem before they're in industry only awakens new passions for them and new ideas, and kind of seeing that arena that they really can excel in. There was a couple of things that you hit on that I really want to highlight. The first thing being that through the STEM challenge, working with Baxter and intersecting it with the Project Lead the Way capstone, your students were able to take content they've learned, whether that's technical skills or their math skills or science skills, and actually apply it with context, with the guys with the help of mentors in the field. So I think that's so critical as well. And I love that you touched on that. that even as an educator, seeing that challenge, we recognize that our educators aren't necessarily experts in the industry challenge. That's why we involve our industry experts. So I think that's a great kind of mix of you being able to learn as well, in addition to your students and alongside your students. So it becomes this exploratory kind of exciting journey together as an educator with your student, with the mentor. So I just wanted to highlight that I really like the way that you kind of gave us that visual. I'd love to hear too, going off of, again, this idea of experience and this idea of working with professionals and kind of co-learning with them. What do you hope that your students took away from this experience?
Well, I hope that they continue to explore their opportunities. That I've got a couple of students now. I know most of their plans. That was obviously one of my out processing. That's so melting. They had to meet with me one-on-one.
Okay.
All my students. We had to do a little Zoom call, just me and Mr. Adkins. And I asked them questions. First obvious question was, what are you going to be doing in the fall? And most students have a plan for that.
Mm-hmm.
My EDD students are a pretty bright group. They all, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to CLC's pre-engineering program. I'm going to Lehigh. I've got a plan. I'm going to NIU to study engineering. Things like that. But I think what really threw them always for a loop, I said, so what's your plan for 10 years? And they just look at you. Like, well, what do you mean, Mr. Adkins? I'm like, so what are you be doing in 10 years?
Yeah.
The September was that was the softball. That was the easy pitch. Now I'm saying, what are you doing in 10 years? So one of the things that you get out of this is, especially working with a company like Baxter, where it's the save and sustain lives, is I'm probably not getting exactly right, but I'm pretty sure that's real close to their mission statement, to save and sustain lives, is it enables them to answer that 10-year question a little more accurately. The opportunity that they had to work with a real problem and to talk about, people who we were doing peritoneal dialysis, and the fact that these are people who struggle with that, but also it makes them aware that that's not the only problem.
Mm-hmm.
There are lots of other problems besides PD dialysis that we need to address in the world. There's lots of other really challenging engineering, challenging societal problems that can be addressed. I mean, obviously, we're living in another era where we are suddenly once again exposing the raw nerve of great sins in our history, and once again recognizing these problems have never gone away and that we still need to address them and still need to fix them. But there's also, for my students, they get to see that all these things come together. One of the things I like to believe is that I do believe engineering as a discipline, as a practice, has the ability to make the world better, to make society better. And I look at the students that I have working with the Baxter program who have the potential to make the world a better place. They are hardworking young men and women. And what we always have to remind them is, if you haven't been exposed to something, you don't know how far you can go. You have to be exposed to the idea that the world around us is bigger than we are. And I always worry about my students getting trapped in Plato's cave, where they don't realize they're looking at shadows of reality on the cave wall. So I want my students, and you can tell them this all you want. You can say to them, hey, you can be whatever you want to be. And then you say, what? And they're like, well, you could do math stuff.
Yeah.
But it's hard. I mean, we do have, as I always joke, I wear a special watch at work, which is synced to our school clocks, because I really break down my classes usually in 90-second intervals. My students who hang out in more than one room will often say, Mr. Adkins, you have this exact same segues. You tell the same stories at the same time in class. I'm like, it looks random. Like, all of you guys think, oh, we derailed Mr. Adkins. He told this weird story, but then somehow it tied back into the lesson. I'm like, or I thought it was like a week ago and I planned it. It only looks straightforward. So, but as much as we tell them their opportunities, as much as we make them study engineering disciplines, we make them study opportunities in the world, and we make them write resumes, and we make them research different companies, it is still so important for them to have a tactile understanding of these are people who've walked the path before me. These are things I can do. So if they get anything out of this, I'd like to think that odds are against any of them actually someday working per se on peritoneal dialysis again. Any of my 6 that specifically did it. But I do believe that many of them are going to someday work on something that makes humanity better. And having such an opportunity to work on with the company of Baxter that is working to save lives it gives them an aspirational goal. And I hope that at the end of the day, as they work their way through their lives and their careers, they sometimes look back and they say, is what I'm doing now making a difference? I mean, that is part of how I became an educator. I was successful at my job, and it was a good job. I did air conditioning systems, but I realized one day that I wasn't actually passionate about it anymore, that didn't feel like I was making the kind of difference I was supposed to be making.
Right.
And that's what led me at 33 to walk away from a career where I had an office and a car and a couch, and I became a teacher. It was surprising. It was definitely my peers were like, most of my peers were kind of like, you're going to do what? One of my mentors, who would later be the Adjutant General of Illinois, General Hayes, when I told him what I was doing, his response was, no, I can see you doing that. And from my time in the military, and I realized that much of what I'd like doing there was instructing and educating my soldiers. So my students now are just a little bit younger than they are, and they're less armed, which is a good thing. But it's so I hope that they get something out of that at the end of the day, you go through a career, and then at some point you might want to circle back and make a difference.
And that's an incredibly powerful message, I think, for all of our students doing the STEM challenge, and for continuing to do the work that you're doing in giving not only experience, but that idea of, yes, what you do can impact the world. Yes, what you do can change the world for the better. And I love that they're taking those skills of articulating and communicating and really focusing on something that was new to them and seeing it all the way through. And they're taking that kind of through their next experience, which I think is wonderful. So that's awesome.
You mentioned communicating, and that's one thing I'm always so proud of my students about, is when we get them as freshmen, we make them stand up the first couple of days of school. We're working how to do that now in the Zoom environment, but we make them stand up and present we have to do like a 2-day challenge, but they have to talk about it. And of course, if anything teenagers love to do is to stand in front of their peers and talk in front of everyone. It's obvious, it's everyone's favorite thing. And we get to see the year by year transition and the growth, because communication of your ideas is one of our power standards. It's one of our objectives. I firmly believe that no matter how complex your engineering is or how complex your solution is, you have to be able to explain it. You have to be able to sit back. There's an author who once wrote a science fiction novel that everyone needs to be able to sketch their idea and explain it in a couple minutes. Just grab a piece of paper and a pencil and draw it out and say, here's what we're trying to do. So I'm really proud when my students sit on Zoom and they did their share out. I was so proud of them, because even in that strange and unique context of working in a digital environment, that they are able to still communicate their ideas and communicate what they've been trying to accomplish. And I'm so proud when they stand up and they hold a microphone in their hands. I think we were using the microphone, right? That they were there.
Yes.
We have mics in our big room. I make my students hold the mic because there's a skill.
Yeah.
At some point, all of us had to learn, if we're presenting, how to hold a microphone. So it's not like, and we rehearse that. We give the mic ahead of time, and we're like, oh my goodness. But I'm so proud of because that builds up confidence. And we talk about these elevator pitch concepts. Mr. Iden and I talk about it in our business environment. He's our business teacher, about how important it is to our students to say, I'm passionate about something, and I'm going to explain it to you in 90 seconds.
Right.
And that was something that the structure of the ISTI challenge, our students, that opening bit in their presentation is, here's our problem, here's what we're doing. And the mentors, my Baxter mentors that my students were able to work with, really helped them encapsulate what they were trying to accomplish. And I think one of the best parts I had was one of my teams was after we met with our Baxter mentors, we realized that we weren't really encapsulating the right problem. We weren't really attacking the right problem yet. So we went back and we redefined what we were attempting to do. And they were very worried that this is a bad thing. And I'm like, no, this is life.
Great.
This is engineering. I've had students sometimes halfway through a project and I look over and they're ripping the whole thing apart. And I'm like, what are you doing? They're like, it was bad. I'm like, well, it wasn't that bad.
Right. It's a learning opportunity. It's all good.
You were making progress, but okay. So your plan is to start from scratch in a week. Okay.
One thing that you kind of touched on that I'd love to elaborate on is this strange new environment that is school in the COVID era, right? So having to switch pretty quickly to a remote learning process, trying to tackle a very hands-on challenge in a remote setting, and then being able to virtually present their findings. But we also understand that that was not new to you or new to your teachers. So I would love to hear kind of what is your experience with e-learning prior to COVID, and what are some things that you've learned to engage your students in an e-learning environment?
Okay, so with e-learning, I think the first time my Round Lake attempted e-learning, I think it would have been 2007.
Okay.
And we bought, the freshmen all got small laptops, a little Lenovo. They were cute little laptops for the era. And we've set up PD and presenters to come in and give us PD on Saturdays or Thursday nights kind of thing. And if there's a way to have done a one-to-one initiative and have it not go well, I think we hit most of those buttons. It fell apart after about 2 years. And there's so many logistical hurdles. But on the other hand, we were also attempting to do something that had never been done before.
Right.
But what that created was there were a lot of us who had in the building, there's a socialist teacher, I'm thinking of Mr. Barnshaw, there's Mr. Trade, who's an English teacher. We had suddenly created this cadre of educators who were like, there's potential here.
Mm-hmm.
And we had administration changes, and we had new administrators come in, and they were like, there's potential here. So since then, we've been embarking on a very deliberate path to become an e-learning school and to handle that. And, I've worked on multiple LMS platforms, learning management systems. We're currently utilizing Canvas, which is a great platform.
Yep.
We've utilized others. But we got to the point where I go back about 8 years, and I was, the Xerox machines ran hard at Round Lake High. Lots of copies. I taught AP Physics, and we did multiple copies of paper per student per day. Lots of paper. And we started progressing to the point where the first time I did an entire lab report. Oh, something weird noise. First time we did an entire lab report where it was all done digitally, I think I did it about 4 years ago or 5 years ago, where my students were actually submitting.
I'm having a little bit of sound issues.
Yeah,
hold on. Oh, try talking again.
Okay, better?
You're good.
First time I did a fully digital lab report in science was about 5 or 6 years ago, where my students actually, they turned in their reports digitally. So if you think about it, that's 5 or 6 years ago. While the pandemic was tough, we've been implementing Canvas. We've been doing professional development on Canvas. More importantly, it's that we have a staff that gets familiar with it. I truly believe a lot of this kind of one-to-one, using computers, using iPads, it comes from learning that your peers are doing it and learning how they did it. As a perfect example, there's a science teacher we have, Mrs. Tess now. She's an excellent educator. So at some point during this COVID crisis, I consider myself to be pretty tech savvy, but I ran into a stumbling block or something. I mentioned I wish I could do this. And one of my students in my Zoom class, digital electronics, was like, well, Mrs. Tesnow does it. So I reached out to Mrs. Tesnow. We scheduled a Zoom appointment, and she taught me how to integrate my iPad into my live Zoom on my laptop with and just because somehow, I don't know if she figured out her own or someone else had told her, but it was one of those, here's an example where my students, who will be part of the program next year that works with ISTI, but they told me, oh, another science teacher's doing it. And I reached out to her, and she taught me. So you get this critical tipping mass, organic institutional learning, where you don't have to walk far down the hallway to find somebody who can help solve your problem. Now, I remember when we first started putting LCD projectors in the classroom and having, what was it? You had to hit F7 or something. I mean, just this, it won't project. And it gets to the point where suddenly we've got a staff of people who are doing this. Our entire building had all of our courses are on Canvas already.
Right.
And so while it was not ideal, we'd already been teaching through a learning management system. Our work is digital. Our students all have iPads. So we're already used to the pushing out a digital document. Students are working digitally. They're submitting, I don't trade paper anymore. If you think back to the classic, I still had a giant computer bag because I used to trade so much paper with my math students, homework a day kind of thing, and tests and quizzes. And you give a test in algebra 1, you end up with a stack of tests. So I don't do that anymore. My tests all sit on my iPad. I was with my mother last fall. She was, we were at an emergency room actually on a Saturday evening, and I was grading work on my iPad because you wait a lot. And at some point, my little beep went off, and one of my students in Saturday afternoon, I'd given him some feedback with a little Apple Pen. Fix this. Don't like your answer here. Do it again. Well, he got the thing. I guess he wasn't doing much on Saturday night at 10 o'clock, and he just fixed it and sent it back to me.
There you go.
And it's an example of and this is October. This is technology enabling us before we got into the crisis. So while I would say that the crisis caught everyone a little bit flat-footed, it caught Round Lake less flat-footed than most. And
Right.
one of the things I was most impressed by, it's not because we were phasing our technology one-to-one integration down from the top down.
Right.
So the school went first, the middle schools have gone second. We have 5 elementary buildings and a kindergarten building. We had kind of a hodgepodge of classroom sets of this. And one of the things that impressed me most is the first couple of weeks of the school year, of the COVID crisis, not the school year, first couple of weeks of the COVID crisis, we managed as a district to finish the one-to-one implementation for all of our students. There's like 8,000 change up. So all of our kindergartners got a device, and everyone above that. We brought our elementary teams online, elementary teachers online, to do a Canvas learning environment.
Okay.
And I work with my elementary PLCW teachers, and I cannot tell you how impressed I am at what they were able to accomplish in such a short time, in such a strange environment. And part of that ability, though, is that we also had already institutionalized, we have the systems in place to help them. We have instructional tech coaches. We have a solid IT department who backs us up and answers our questions and get things done. So I was just so impressed that if you think about it, we accelerated our timeline of our rollout by like 1.5 years, and we did it during a pandemic.
Right.
Like we brought in TAs and they were sanitizing devices. Like we had to go through our buildings. It was like, did you have a class of study computers? Well, there are no more kids, so we're taking them.
Yeah.
We're going to re-image all of them. Right? And you think about all these logistical hurdles.
Right.
And just the fact that Round Lake was able to accomplish that. And by the time we got to mid-April, we were able to say, hey, we are from kindergarten up. And the assignments my teachers are making, one of my first grade teachers, they had the kids building a fort, taking a picture of their living room fort. But it's an engineering problem.
Yeah.
I mean, just the level of rapid integration. And I think that is a testament to our educators and testament to how hard they work for our students and testament to the fact that, you know, as I said before, we've got things we're working on. Everybody knows that, but we've accomplished a fair amount.
Yeah.
We should be proud of that. So we had a leg up on this one-to-one thing. Like I said, it's been about 6-7 years, and that's so beneficial. Like I said, even educators like myself who've been messing around computers since, you know, as I joke, our first one-to-one, which I still have one of them somewhere. But even I learned stuff. And because we have a culture in our building where we're able to ask each other questions.
Yeah.
Like,
And I like that even the students are responsive of like, no, actually, we know how to do that because this teacher, I think that's an awesome, another resource.
It is.
Being open with your students about it too, that you're learning as well.
I have actually wandered the building before. I'm like, what do you mean? Who did that? Oh, that looks pretty cool. Oh, I'm sorry. That was Mr. Moss. Well, I'm going to make a mental note. I'm going to track him down because I'm not sure, but that looked neat. Yeah. So when you start getting that critical tipping mass of changing an organization. So I talked earlier about how students have integrated technology and the use of like our 3D printers and our systems into their learning experience. Well, when we first started doing this one-to-one thing 13 years ago, it was new and it was weird, and it was like today I got a call once that some people are coming from state and they wanted to quote, see a lab where the kids have to use the computers. I'm like, well, what's your objective here? Are we using the computers or are we doing science?
Right. I
mean, but that was where we started.
Right.
But now it's, you know, if you come into our classroom, students are we're just learning. I mean, we got a lot to learn. Yeah. We have our curriculum, and then we have our societal lessons, and we have our context lessons, and we have our communication objectives, and of course we structure and try to focus on our improving our reading across the board. There's another example, something around like we have reading coaches in our building, and they help us instruct students how to read in our environments. And we have some great teachers there that I sit down with and I say, you know, here's what I'm trying to accomplish in the classroom. Sure. Here's a literacy exercise I can do with them. Here's a literacy strategy that I can do with my students. So there's another example of yet a different arena where I've got teachers in my building who are actual high school teachers taught in the classroom. And now part of their role is to help me, you know, become a better literacy teacher, because if you can't read, you can't communicate, and communication is an engineering standard. Right. So
I think, and I want to pause you for a second because that's a really interesting perspective. Project Lead the Way is one of the most STEM focused courses I can think of. Like if someone asked me, you know, what's a STEM course at a high school? What's an offering? I would say Project Lead the Way. But you just did a great job of bringing in that STEM is not siloed at all. literacy is a huge aspect of STEM. It's not just science, technology, engineering, math. It's not just putting a student on a computer. It is really helping them understand how that computer leverages them to go further in whatever content they're focusing on. So using that and not necessarily being siloed. And so that kind of rolls into my next question really well. With ISTI and Project Lead the Way, both focus a great amount on design thinking. And oftentimes, we do not work with Project Lead the Way teachers. We work with teachers that are in all sorts of content. So from your perspective, why might design thinking be especially important in a non-Project Lead the Way classroom? And then vice versa, what are some other skills that you bring into Project Lead the Way that may be from other contents?
Design thinking is, I think it really, well, obviously I'm a science and math teacher for the most part, but I think one of the things that we have to do is, I've watched some classes and we talk about teaching history. And that's what I was looking at Facing History event last night. We talk about teaching history within context. And then when you look at design, you have to look at where you start from.
Mm-hmm.
What are your initial knowns? What do I have available to me? Well, we take that same process and we look at, say, studying events in society, and we say, who are my speakers? Who are my authors of this text? What was their context? What was their understanding? As the speaker last night talked about, it's like you can't talk about Emerson's writings without understanding who he was and the era that he lived in. So we have, that's where you take the design thinking of trying to solve a problem at a functional level. The problem that we're facing is how to turn our young adults into good citizens,
Mm-hmm.
into productive citizens, and there's so much that can be unpacked there. I've been on a couple different mission statement teams where we talk about what are we trying to do in education, and this idea of citizenship, this idea of becoming a good person. There's so much we could spend days unpacking this.
Right.
But at the end of the day, this process of working your way through a series of steps, the design process, is applicable to anything. It's like if I'm going to attempt, I actually for a while subbed in an English classroom, a self-contained English classroom. And I get support from admin, and just I ended up subbing there one day, and it was a great opportunity. And I was teaching a book about living on an Indian reservation, and it's really good for me. But the parallels of working through design problem are the same thing, are still there. What is it that I want to build? What is it that I want my students to understand? What is it that I want them to be able to explain, or what we want them to put in context? So these lessons of how do you solve a problem, and they're still there. We have the whole concept of UBD, understanding by design, and curriculum building, and what are your objectives, what are your standards, and what are your assessments, and you work your way back through it. That's still the design process.
Yeah.
We talk about like something different. No, that's the design process. Instead of the product that we're designing is effective instruction.
Mm-hmm.
Just as my students were attempting to design a device that purified water for home use and peritoneal dialysis, the problem that we as educators, the product that we were attempting to design is how do we make our students better than they were when they walked in the door?
Mm-hmm.
And this is the design process. And I've been involved in very passionate debates about how much of the Civil War do we include? How much of World War II? Is World War I just like a week? I mean, just what are the themes in history? What are the themes in English? What are the themes in society? So we have the same discussion in an engineering classroom. It's like, okay, I get that, but how far into the working model of circuits do we really want to go?
Right.
Because there's I use it now, but then we can go a level deeper, or we can go a level deeper than that. We talk about diodes. Well, in my engineering class right now, do I go into length of how this emitting light forces the emission of electrons? This is was one of the 3 unsolved problems of physics 120 years ago that we just thought we had a few nuances to iron out would be good, physics would be solved. And then along came Einstein, and we went, wow, there's realms of unknown that we had no idea even was there. Or in my engineering class, to say, okay, guys, these are diodes. They have to go in one way or the other, or they don't light up. Because the objective in my class might not be having the students understand the construct, the physics, the atomic movements behind how a diode works.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to get them to say, you're going to use the diode because something needs to indicate where your motor's spinning, so you put your hand in it. So we always talk about, but part of me wants to make sure they do know. We have, so even in something that you say as simple as, let's see, we're going to teach students how to build circuits and light up a diode. There's still so much there to talk about the design process of what are we actually trying to get them to do.
Mm-hmm.
Then you go into these really tough conversations about, philosophy or ethics, or we're going to teach students, what's good and what's bad. Well, so much that's dependent on the society that you come from. So we have these, that's the process, I think. I think, believe it or not, most teachers do the design process. We just don't call it that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we are doing a design process every time we sit down and do curriculum. They are functionally working the design process. They have all sorts of resources. Just like my seniors, I basically said, you've got the entire room and almost anything on Amazon or McMaster-Carr. Mr. Adkins, can we buy one of these? Do you have a reason to get it? Yes.
Right.
I make a little bit of justification. I did not allow my students to get nitrous this year. I'm like, you never quite justified that. They were quite frustrated. I wouldn't let them get the nitrous just because. I'm like, I want a little more from you. But that's the same thing to do as education.
Right. I think that's a really unique mindset as well, that even when you're tackling, something beyond Project Lead the Way or something beyond what is traditionally labeled as STEM, there's so much that goes into that design of your students as your users. Or even, if the students are tackling a problem in literature, being able to understand, again, that root of it, the real problem at hand, and then what the end goal is. I think that's a really unique perspective. So thank you for sharing that.
I do believe, like, I've had conversations and some of the AP teachers and I used to sit down, and at a functional level, I think whether it's AP physics or AP language and literature or AP calculus or AP US history, we're all trying to do the same thing. We're trying to get our students to critically examine their world, understand where they're coming from, and draw conclusions that lead to a course of action from it. Yeah. And that's a theme across, regardless, STEM, English, PE. We're trying to make our students into lifelong healthy people. We're doing the same thing now. Those are also there's so much that goes on in that department in my building as well. They're just doing great things.
Yeah. And I know, kind of before we went live, you and I were talking a little bit about your students and kind of as they wrapped up the year. And so to kind of wrap up our conversation right now as well, in a non-traditional year, I mean, especially I think because it's so non-traditional, what do you hope your students, and not just your STEM ISTI students, what do you hope your students from Round Lake walk out of your year or walk out of your classroom with? Takeaways, experiences, anything that are your hopes for your students?
I hope they understand that they're capable of persevering, that this is not the way that we intended to end a school year. My students lost so much and so many memories and so many experiences that they didn't have. But that doesn't take away from their ability to achieve greatness, and that doesn't take away from the ability to make a difference. And sometimes they have to persevere. There's that line about sometimes you do everything right and still lose. That's not unfair. That's life. That my students, it was hard. I mean, if you think about it, one of my students actually told me his out processing or out interview with me was, Mr. Adkins, it's really hard for me to work on your stuff or on anything.
Yeah.
It's hard. And it is hard at 18 years old when you're like, hey, I was supposed to be a baseball player and I was supposed to be like going to prom and I was supposed to be, honors night and things like that. And we as adults sometimes don't recognize how complicated it is to be a teenager. I think it is, I'm pushing 30 years, 20 years removed from it, but it is harder, I think, believe, to be a teenager in this environment, in this era of social just integration and constant low-level efficacy communication that our students are inundated with. It's hard for them to step back. And I'm proud of how they did it. And I'm proud of how, the end of the day, they came through. I ran into one of my students in the Prairie Path a couple of days ago, young Stephen, who is going to be in the program next year. And we had a great conversation. And he said to me as well, he goes, it's been hard, Mr. Adkins.
Yeah.
It's like, what's the theme? It's like, have you ever done one-to-one learning? And I'm like, oh, yes, I have. We've been doing it around, like as I said earlier, for like years. It's like, oh, have you ever done one-to-one learning where everyone's at home and your Wi-Fi cuts out and you're using it? We hand all our kids iPads. Then we're like, now we need to teach them how to use iPads remotely. it's that classic Apollo 13 problem. But then at least we had trained engineers and trained astronauts on both ends. Here, my elementary teachers are like, they were making videos for the second graders to follow how to submit something on Canvas. And I'm like, wow, this is hard, because at least when I was doing it in the last couple of years, so 3-4 years ago, when we started using Canvas, I would like sit with the kid and I'd sit over their shoulder. I'm like, touch the square. Okay. Well, they're doing it remotely. And so the teachers are persevering. My students are persevering. And I think going forward, the challenges aren't over. I mean, we have not achieved what I think this nation's supposed to be capable of achieving. We've not achieved as a society what we are supposed to be capable of achieving. And there's so much more work to be done, and these huge, tremendous global challenges that face our students. And I hope that as part of this non-traditional end of the year, that they recognize that they can persevere, they can see their way through the struggling times, but that they can also then make a difference in the outcome.
Right.
Like, it's not just that they saw their way through it, is that at the end of the day, they made a difference. And I have former students that are protesting. I have former students that are making a difference. And I have former students that have created something called Project Voice. And I'm so proud of her as well. So, I mean, we have all these students out there that are doing amazing things. And that's what I want my current seniors and my current underclassmen to take away from is they can continue to make a difference. They're powerful individuals, and it is the combination of their voices as individuals that makes a difference for our society. And I was talked earlier about, you reach that critical tipping mass of computers just within my building and my school community as teachers. 230 some people work around my high school, which is a lot in one building. And that's 180 some certified educators and all those people that make it possible for us to do our job. So we reached this, but in that regards of becoming one-to-one, we reached our tipping point and are making a difference. But I remember it started small, or the first couple of people who got computers in their classrooms, we all fit in the conference room, like 8 of us. Well, I have hope that, like, last night I was on a call with just 8 or 9 of my educators, and wonderful, amazing, brilliant people. And I'm honored to be associated with them. And they are, once again, we're talking about another challenge. And I hope that we can progress again, because you don't know when, it's the whole crossing the curve or changing the inflection curve. You don't know at the time when it happens. Like, I can't, looking back, I can probably start to tell you when it was like, okay, around like high as an organization, we were getting this one-to-one thing. But the time, you don't know. You're focused on what do you mean my course just disappeared? And yeah, do you know, just the computers went offline yesterday. And, one day we did some update, and both my drones said, we're not going to fly anymore. I'm like, what do you mean drones just aren't going to take off? They're just not going. You're caught up in the minutia of the details of effective instruction.
Yeah.
But as long as you have this overarching goal of what you're trying to achieve, this idea of understanding that our students are supposed to be better people, you just keep working towards it. And that's what I want, not just our students to take away, but it's part of the teachers as well, and it's part of society. My teachers, the theme from my peers is, not really big fans of this sitting at home and talking to our computer screen thing. I think I was on a couple calls with Kristen where, I would get interrupted by my students, and they would just walk up and ask, not even technically, not my class, they're all my students, I said earlier, but they would just walk up and, Mr. Adkins, I'm trying to get this unbolted. And I'm like, Kristen, hold on a second. And then the other point where even she recognized, I'm like, okay, I'm having a conversation with my ISTI coach, and she did a wonderful job. But she understood that I'm still sitting in a classroom, and my students, I'm a resource to them. And at the end of the day, they do come first. We'll catch up on the paperwork on the backside. We always do.
I like that.
So, yeah.
And the students have been so resilient and so persistent to, just see a problem through, and just, I think it's going to be a different year of learning next year as well. And so I think those challenges, as you mentioned, they still may be there, but our students are going to be strong. They're going to have teachers like you to kind of lead them through that. So Mr. Adkins, thank you so much for taking some time to chat with me this morning. For any of our viewers, if you have questions or comments, feel free to drop them in the comment section below, and Mr. Adkins will have a chance to look at those. But for everyone else, have a safe and wonderful Thursday, and we will be back on for our last week of the Spring Spotlight series next week. So everyone have a wonderful day.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Ms. Villalobos. I see a comment from you over there. So, a PLTW alumna who is
Oh,
working
wonderful. Awesome.
to another great example of the kind of students I'm honored to have been associated with. And there are many. It's a long list,
I imagine
but
so.
they keep making us better.
All right. Well, to everyone again, have a wonderful day,
Thank
and
you very
we'll
much,
see you
and have a
next
great
week.
day.
Awesome.
Yes.